She gave her daughter everything, then got kicked out. She gave her daughter everything believing that love meant serving in silence, but instead of gratitude, she received a cold order. Get out of my house. 3 days later, a viral video changes everything and exposes the truth for the entire country to see. And the daughter, who discarded her without remorse, now begs for forgiveness in front of everyone. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, when Dorothy still believed that the worst things in life were her backaches and the loneliness that embraced her afternoons. 68 years of existence had taught her not to expect surprises, just small routines that kept her going. Black coffee at 6 in the morning, evening soap operas, rosary before bed. The mailman delivered the document with his usual indifference, not imagining he was carrying the demolition of an entire world in his hands. Dorothy held the paper with trembling fingers, not from its physical weight, but from the intuition that something was terribly wrong. When she read the first lines, the words seemed to dance on the page, as if written in a foreign language. Eviction notice. Legal owner. 30-day deadline. And there, in the signature, the name she had pronounced as her first word, Karen, her only daughter. She sat in the worn armchair in the living room, the same one where she had nursed Karen when she was still a fussy, dependent baby. She read the document 3 times, as if repetition could alter its content. She couldn't understand how she had reached this point. When she transferred the house deed to her daughter's name years ago, she believed she was doing what was best for both of them. Karen had promised it was just a bureaucratic matter, something about taxes and fiscal benefits. "Trust me, Mum," she had said with that smile Dorothy had always interpreted as genuine affection. Now sitting in the heavy silence of morning, Dorothy began to understand that perhaps she had never really understood who Karen was. The daughter she raised alone, after her husband disappeared one dawn without explanations, had always been distant. Polite, yes. Respectful, to the extent possible. But distant like someone who follows protocols instead of nurturing affection. Dorothy justified this coldness by the father's absence, by the sacrifices she had to make, by the nights when she arrived home from work, too late for long conversations or lingering hugs. For decades, Dorothy had constructed a narrative where silence was a form of love. She served meals without questioning tastes or preferences, washed clothes without complaining about the quantity, saved on everything so Karen could attend better schools. When her daughter married and moved to another neighborhood, Dorothy remained available for any need. She cared for her granddaughter, Emily, whenever requested. She prepared soups when Karen was sick. She never demanded, never questioned, never required reciprocity. She believed that the absence of complaints was a sign of family balance. If Karen didn't complain, it meant she was satisfied. If she didn't call frequently, it was because she was busy building her own life. Dorothy was content with sporadic visits, usually accompanied by specific requests. A grandmother's recipe, help with Emily during school vacations, small loans that were never repaid. The phone rang in the middle of the afternoon, interrupting thoughts that were spinning in desperate circles in Dorothy's mind. It was Karen, with that controlled voice she used in formal situations. "Mum, I imagine you've already received the notification," she said, without preambles or questions about her well-being. "Karen, honey, I don't understand," Dorothy managed to articulate, her voice coming out weaker than intended. "Why did you do this?" "Mom, you need to understand that it's nothing personal. It's a practical matter. You're becoming more forgetful, more dependent. Just yesterday, the neighbor called me saying you left the gas on all night, and last week you got lost coming back from the grocery store." Dorothy wanted to protest, explained that the gas was left on because she was worried about an overdue bill, that she got lost because they were doing road work and changed the usual route. But Karen continued talking, as if she were reading a prepared text. "I've already talked with some places appropriate for your age. Places where you'll have company, activities, medical care when you need it. It will be better for you, Mom, and for all of us." "But Karen, this is my home. Everything I have is here, all the memories." "Mom, don't be dramatic, they're just objects. Memories are carried in the heart, not in old furniture." Dorothy felt something break in her chest, as if a rope supporting her internal structure had snapped. Karen was talking about her life, as if it were an administrative problem to be solved. as if 68 years of existence could be summed up as objects and old furniture. And Emily, does she know about this? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Dorothy noticed the hesitation in her daughter's breathing. Emily is in college, focused on her studies. She doesn't need to worry about issues that aren't appropriate for her age. She's my granddaughter, Karen. She has the right to know what's happening to her grandmother. Mom, please don't complicate things more than they already are. Emily has her own life to build. We can't burden her with our family problems. Our family problems. As if Dorothy were a shared problem, not a person with feelings and rights. The conversation ended with Karen promising to send someone to help with the move, and Dorothy hanging up the phone with the feeling of having lost not just her home, but her very identity. The following days passed like a painful blur. Dorothy tried to organize her belongings, but how do you choose what to take when your entire life fits into 2 suitcases? The photographs from Karen's childhood, the knickknacks she had collected over the years, the sewing machine where she had made so many clothes to save money. Everything seemed to have lost its value in the face of the practical reality of moving. Neighbors who had greeted her for decades now averted their eyes when she passed on the street. Dorothy noticed the whispers, the conversations that ceased when she approached. Karen had spread her version of events. Her mother was disoriented, needed special care. It was better for her. No one questioned. No one offered help. No one asked Dorothy what she really wanted. On her last day in the house, Dorothy sat in the backyard where she had planted so many flowers over the years. The roses that bore her name were blooming, ignorant that there would be no one left to water them. She looked at the windows of the house, each one keeping specific memories. The room where Karen spent her childhood, the kitchen where she prepared thousands of meals, the living room where she watched Emily take her first steps. When the institution's car arrived to pick her up, Dorothy handed the keys to Karen without being able to meet her daughter's gaze. Karen hugged her quickly, a mechanical and perfunctory gesture, whispering, "Everything will be fine, Mom," before moving away again. During the journey to the care home, Dorothy observed through the window the streets she knew by heart, trying to memorize every detail as if it were the last time she would see that world. And perhaps it was. In the seat next to the driver, Karen was talking on the phone about professional commitments, planning her day as if she weren't taking her own mother to a forced exile. Sunset Haven Care Center seemed clean and organized, with polite staff and clear rules. Dorothy was shown to her room, shared with 3 other women. One of them slept constantly, another talked to herself in a low voice. The third just observed her with empty eyes when she entered. The bed assigned to Dorothy was next to the window, from where she could see a grey wall and part of a parking lot. Karen signed some papers, left a phone number for emergencies, and left promising to return soon. Dorothy stood in the middle of the room, holding her 2 suitcases, not knowing exactly what to do with the limited freedom of her new world. A staff member explained the meal schedules, activities, and medications. Everything very organized, very efficient, very empty of anything that resembled real life. That first night, lying in a bed that smelled of disinfectant and hearing the groans and murmurs of the other residents, Dorothy finally understood the magnitude of the sentence she had received. It was as if they had torn up her past and thrown it in a garbage bag along with expired food and dusty portraits. Karen hadn't just taken her home, she had taken her existence, her dignity, her right to choose her own destiny. And the most painful thing of all was the certainty that, if she could go back in time, Dorothy would do everything the same way, because she loved Karen with an intensity that transcended logic, with a devotion that didn't demand reciprocity. Even being treated as an inconvenient burden, an uncomfortable responsibility, Dorothy still carried in her heart the irrational hope that somehow love could be restored. The routine at the care center was relentless in its monotony. Dorothy woke at 6 in the morning to the sound of the electric bell, drank watery coffee with the other residents, participated in activities that seemed designed to keep them occupied, not happy. Watercolor painting on cheap paper, crochet with coarse yarn, bingo with symbolic prizes. Everything very civilized, very organized, very dead inside. Weeks passed before Dorothy could fully understand where she was. Not geographically, she discovered that on the first day. But emotionally, existentially, it took her time to accept that this place wasn't a temporary pause in her life. It was her new world, possibly forever. The other women in the room were a cruel mirror of what Dorothy feared becoming. Mrs. Jenkins, who occupied the bed by the window, spent the first days talking about the son who would come to get her tomorrow. After a month, she was still waiting, but with less conviction in her voice. Mrs. Thompson, the one who slept constantly, sometimes woke up screaming names of people Dorothy suspected no longer existed. And there was Lucy, who communicated only through gazes loaded with an old and irremediable sadness. Dorothy initially tried to maintain a dignified posture, arranging her corner meticulously, dressing carefully even with nowhere to go. She wrote letters to Karen that she never sent, letters where she tried to explain her feelings, her needs, her version of events. But as the days accumulated without visits, without phone calls, without any sign that she existed in the outside world, Dorothy began to come undone inside. The food was bland, prepared in industrial quantities, without love or attention to individual tastes. Dorothy, who for decades had cooked with pleasure and dedication, now swallowed mechanical meals that tasted of nothing. The beans were hard, the rice soggy, the meat tasted like medicine. In the first weeks she could barely eat. Later she began to eat without feeling, just to keep her body functioning. It was during one of these silent meals that Dorothy witnessed the first real collapse of a resident. Mrs. Miller, a 72-year-old woman who talked incessantly about her house in the rural area, began screaming in the middle of lunch that she wanted to go home. She wanted her chickens, her garden, her bed that smelled of lavender. The staff tried to calm her with sweet words and medications, but Mrs. Miller continued screaming, crying, asking someone to call her children. Dorothy watched the scene with a pain in her chest that she couldn't identify. It was like seeing her own despair reflected in someone else's screams. When Mrs. Miller was taken to the infirmary, the dining room returned to its habitual silence, but Dorothy couldn't eat anymore. She spent the rest of the day thinking about how they were all different versions of the same story. Women who had become inconvenient for the families they raised. At night, lying in the hard bed, Dorothy began to write. At first, they were just loose notes, outpourings without a specific recipient, words that sprouted from her chest like blood from an open wound. She wrote about the feeling of irrelevance, about the fear of being forgotten, about the difference between being cared for and being deposited. I discovered there is a cruel difference between being loved and being tolerated, she wrote one of the first nights. During all these years, I thought Karen loved me because she didn't complain about me. Today, I understand that she merely tolerated me, waiting for the right moment to get rid of the burden. The words came out unfiltered, raw, and painful. Dorothy wrote about Karen's childhood, about the times she worked double shifts to pay for private school, about the nights she pretended not to be hungry so her daughter could have seconds at dinner. She wrote about the husband who left, about the loneliness of raising a child alone, about the sacrifices she made believing she was investing in future love. She told me that memories are carried in the heart, not in objects, Dorothy noted after 2 weeks in the care center. But she doesn't understand that my house wasn't just furniture and walls. It was the place where her childhood happened, where I transformed into a mother, where I learned to be strong because I had no choice. How do you explain this to someone who sees their own history as something disposable? Dorothy's writings began to attract attention from some staff members. Nurse Sarah, a woman in her 40s who worked the night shift, stopped several times to talk with her. She was different from the other staff, who treated the residents with distant and professional politeness. Sarah would sit on the edge of Dorothy's bed and ask about her life, about her writings, about her feelings. "You write very well," said Sarah during one of these nighttime conversations. "Have you ever thought about doing something with these texts?" Dorothy laughed bitterly. "Do what, dear? Who's interested in the story of an abandoned old woman?" "You're mistaken, Mrs. Dorothy. There are many people going through the same situation. Sometimes people need to know they're not alone in their suffering." It was Sarah who suggested that Dorothy organize her writings in a more structured way. She brought new notebooks, better pens, even a small lamp so Dorothy could write more comfortably during the night. Sometimes, when the care center was quieter, Sarah would sit beside Dorothy and listen to excerpts from the texts. "You have a gift," Sarah would say after each reading. "You can transform pain into words in a way that reaches anyone's heart." But not everyone at the care center approved of Dorothy's dedication to writing. Some staff from the day shift commented that she was isolating herself, that she needed to participate more in group activities. The care center coordinator, Mrs. Wilson, a 50-year-old woman with a permanently tired look, called Dorothy in several times for conversations about the importance of adapting to her new reality. "Mrs. Dorothy, I understand that the change is difficult, but you need to make an effort to integrate better. Spending all your time writing isn't healthy," she said during one of these conversations. Dorothy tried to explain that writing was her way of processing pain, of maintaining mental sanity, of feeling still alive inside. But Mrs. Wilson seemed more concerned with administrative protocols than with individual needs. "Here we have a routine that works for all residents. Programmed activities, established schedules, rules that guarantee collective harmony. You cannot be an exception." It was during one of these tense conversations that the incident occurred that would change everything. Dorothy was in the care center courtyard, trying to find a sunny spot to write, when she heard screams coming from the dining room. It was Mrs. Miller again, who had been calm for days after her last outburst. This time, she wasn't just screaming about her home. She was shouting about dignity, about rights, about the crime being committed against all of them. "We are not trash," Mrs. Miller bellowed, while staff tried to contain her. "We raised children, we worked, we paid taxes, we built families. How can you treat us like we're broken furniture?" Dorothy dropped her notebook and ran to the dining room. She found Mrs. Miller being held by 2 staff members, while other residents watched the scene with fear and embarrassment. Without thinking about the consequences, Dorothy approached and held Mrs. Miller's hand. "I know, dear," said Dorothy with a firm voice. "I know how you feel, and you're right, we're not trash." Dorothy's presence seemed to momentarily calm Mrs. Miller, but one of the staff members, Ryan, who had always treated the residents with barely disguised impatience, lost his composure. "Mrs. Dorothy, you shouldn't interfere. Go back to your room and let us do our job." "Job?" Dorothy repeated, feeling an old anger rise in her throat. "Your job is to care for us, not treat us like we're dangerous animals." "You're getting unnecessarily agitated," Ryan replied with a condescending tone. "Go back to your room before I have to call the coordination office." It was at this moment that Dorothy realized several residents had gathered around the scene, women who rarely spoke to each other, who each lived in their own world of memories and longings, were now united by the same feeling of indignation. Dorothy looked at the faces around her and saw reflections of her own pain. "I'm not going back to my room," said Dorothy, still holding Mrs. Miller's hand. "And you can't force us to accept any kind of treatment. We are still people, we still have rights." The commotion attracted attention from other staff, and eventually from Mrs. Wilson herself. When she arrived at the dining room, she found about 15 residents gathered around Dorothy and Mrs. Miller in a kind of silent but determined protest. "What's going on here?" asked Mrs. Wilson, with a voice that tried to maintain authority. Dorothy stood up, without letting go of Mrs. Miller's hand, and for the first time since arriving at the care center, felt truly present, truly alive. "What's happening?" said Dorothy, with a voice that echoed throughout the dining room, "is that we've decided to remember that we still exist." The incident in the dining room had consequences that Dorothy hadn't foreseen. Mrs. Wilson reported the occurrence to Karen, describing her mother as disobedient and a negative influence on other residents. Karen responded by increasing the restrictions. Dorothy lost visitation rights for 2 weeks and had her notebooks temporarily confiscated. But something had irreversibly changed in the care center. The women who witnessed the moment when Dorothy refused to passively accept degrading treatment began to seek her out. Whispered conversations during meals, exchanges of complicit glances in the hallways, small gestures of solidarity that Mrs. Wilson couldn't completely control. Mrs. Jenkins stopped talking about the son who would come to get her and began telling real stories about her life. Lucy, who communicated only through glances, asked for paper and pen to write her own memories. Even Mrs. Thompson, in the moments when she was awake and lucid, contributed fragments of her personal history. Dorothy realized she wasn't the only one with a complex narrative of love, sacrifice, and abandonment. Each woman carried her version of the same tragedy. Families who saw them as burdens, children who confused care with deposit, societies that discarded entire generations as if they were expired products. During the days her notebooks were confiscated, Dorothy continued writing mentally, organizing thoughts and memories that she would transcribe later. When she finally recovered her materials, she found a surprise. Someone had added a note on the last page of the main notebook. "Your story matters. Keep writing. a friend. Dorothy suspected it was Sarah, but the nurse denied it with a mysterious smile when asked. What mattered was that Dorothy no longer felt completely alone in her need to document what she was experiencing. It was during this time that Emily began to find her grandmother's prolonged absence strange. A journalism student at the State University, Emily had always had a special relationship with Dorothy. As a child, she spent entire afternoons at her grandmother's house, listening to stories, learning recipes, feeling loved in an unconditional way that she didn't always find at home. Karen had always justified the distance between mother and daughter as personality differences. She said that Dorothy was too dramatic, too melancholic, stuck in the past. Emily grew up believing these characteristics were flaws, not traits of a person who faced life with more difficulties than she should have. When Emily asked about Dorothy for the third time in a month, Karen finally revealed part of the truth. She said that her grandmother was going through a difficult period, that she needed specialized care, that she was temporarily in an appropriate institution. What kind of institution? Emily asked, feeling a strange chill in her stomach. A place where she can have company from people her age, directed activities, medical assistance when she needs it, Karen answered, avoiding her daughter's gaze. Mum, you're talking about a nursing home. Emily, don't be dramatic. It's a very good place, clean, organized. Your grandmother is well cared for. Emily couldn't accept the explanation. That same afternoon, after classes, she took 2 buses and went to the house where Dorothy had always lived. She found the property empty, with a for sale sign in front. Neighbors who had known Emily since she was little told different versions of the same story. Dorothy had been taken away because she couldn't take care of herself anymore. But the version that bothered Emily the most came from Nancy, a neighbor for more than 20 years who approached her with a conspiratorial air. Emily, your grandmother didn't want to go, you know. She cried a lot on the last day, asked someone to call you. Your mother said no one should interfere, that you had already resolved everything as a family. Emily felt the world spin. Dorothy had asked someone to call her, but no one did. Karen had completely controlled the narrative, isolating Dorothy from any possibility of defense or appeal. That night, Emily confronted her mother more firmly. Mum, I need to see Grandma. I need to know how she really is. Emily, you're in college. You have your responsibilities. You can't get involved with these complicated family matters. What complicated matters? She's my grandmother. I have the right to see her. Karen sighed with that expression she used when she considered Emily too immature to understand adult things. All right, they'll allow 1 visit. But it's important that you understand your grandmother might be as different. Sometimes a change in environment disorients people her age. The visit was scheduled for the following Sunday. Emily spent the entire week anxious, trying to imagine how she would find Dorothy. Karen had painted a picture of mental deterioration, of medical necessity, of practical inevitability. But Emily couldn't reconcile this image with her last memories of her grandmother, a lucid, independent, affectionate woman. When they arrived at Sunset Haven Care Center, Emily was impressed with the external appearance. The building was indeed clean, well-maintained, with manicured gardens. Karen took the opportunity to reinforce her version of events. See, it's a very good place. Your grandmother is being well cared for. But when they found Dorothy in the visiting room, Emily had to use all her willpower not to cry in front of her mother. Dorothy had visibly lost weight, had deep, dark circles under her eyes, and an expression of sadness that Emily had never seen before. More impactful than her physical appearance was something indefinable in Dorothy's posture, as if an essential part of her personality had been erased. "Grandma," Emily said, hugging Dorothy tightly. "How are you?" Dorothy returned the hug with a desperate intensity, as if Emily were the first real person she had seen in months. "Emily, my dear," Dorothy whispered in her granddaughter's ear, "I'm so glad you came to see me." Karen controlled the conversation during the first few minutes, asking routine questions about food, sleep, activities. Dorothy answered mechanically, clearly embarrassed by her daughter's presence. But when Karen got up to speak with the coordination office about some administrative procedures, Emily took the opportunity to talk alone with her grandmother. "Grandma, tell me the truth. How are you really?" Dorothy looked around, making sure there were no staff members nearby, and held Emily's hands tightly. "Emily, honey, I didn't want to come here. Your mother said I had no choice. that it was best for everyone. But I was fine in my home. I could take care of myself. Grandma, but Mom said you were forgetful, that you got lost coming back from the grocery store. Emily, listen to me, Dorothy interrupted, with an urgency in her voice that frightened her granddaughter. I got lost once because they were doing road work in the street, just once, and the gas was left on because I was worried about a bill and forgot. That doesn't mean I was sick or incapable. Emily felt something crumble in her chest. Dorothy was lucid, articulate, completely aware of her situation. She didn't seem like a person who needed specialized care. She seemed like a person who was sad, hurt, abandoned. Grandma, why didn't you call me? Why didn't you tell me what was happening? Dorothy lowered her eyes, embarrassed. Emily, your mother said you were busy with college, that we shouldn't bother you with our problems. And after I came here, well, it's not easy to make calls here, and I didn't want to worry you. When Karen returned, Emily was visibly shaken. During the journey back home, she couldn't disguise her discomfort. Mom, Grandma doesn't seem sick. She seems sad. Emily, you don't have the experience to evaluate these things. Sadness and depression are common symptoms in people her age when they go through changes. But if she's depressed, wouldn't it be better for her to be near family at home with affection? Karen stopped the car abruptly on the shoulder and turned to face Emily. Emily, do you think it was easy for me to make this decision? Do you think I didn't suffer with this? But sometimes we need to make difficult choices for the good of everyone, including the person herself. Mom, I'm not judging you. I'm just trying to understand. No, Emily, you are judging because you don't know what it's like to have to take care of someone every day, to worry constantly, to have your life limited by someone else's needs. Emily fell silent, processing what her mother had just revealed. Karen had confessed that she saw Dorothy as a limitation in her life, a burden that restricted her freedom. It wasn't a medical matter or a safety issue, it was a matter of personal convenience. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the expression of silent despair on Dorothy's face, the way her grandmother had held her hands tightly, as if she were drowning, and Emily was her only possibility of salvation. On Monday, instead of going to classes, Emily returned to the care center, this time alone without Karen to control the conversation. She found Dorothy in the courtyard, writing in a worn notebook. Grandma, what are you writing? Dorothy hesitated for a moment, then clutched the notebook to her chest. They're just memories, Emily. Things I don't want to forget. May I see? Dorothy looked around nervously, then opened the notebook to a random page. Emily read a few paragraphs and felt her eyes fill with tears. They were profound, emotional accounts of the experience of being abandoned by her own daughter, written with a clarity and sensitivity that shattered any suggestion of mental decline. Grandma, this is beautiful and very important. Emily, it's nothing special, just an old woman trying to understand what happened to her life. No, Grandma, this is much more than you imagine. This is a document, a testimony. How many people must be going through the same situation and feeling alone? Emily had an idea that would change everything. Grandma, would you let me use these texts for a project in college? About elder abandonment, about how society treats its older generations. Dorothy was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. If you think it can help other people not to feel as alone as I feel, it can help, Grandma, very much. When Emily left the care center that afternoon, she carried photocopies of several of Dorothy's texts and an iron determination to transform that pain into something that had social meaning. She didn't imagine that her decision would trigger a sequence of events that would change not only Dorothy's life, but would call into question the entire narrative that Karen had constructed about being a responsible daughter making difficult choices. Emily's project began as academic work, but quickly transformed into something much larger. At the School of Journalism, she presented Dorothy's texts to her advisor, Professor Barbara, a 50-year-old woman who specialized in reporting on social issues. Emily, this is extraordinary, said the professor after reading the first accounts. Your grandmother has a natural talent for transforming personal experience into universal narrative, and the theme is urgent. Do you know how many elderly people are abandoned by their families every year in America? Emily didn't know the numbers, but now she had a face, a personal story that gave meaning to the statistics. She decided to expand the project, interviewing other residents of the care center, researching data on elder abandonment, investigating the legal gaps that allowed situations like Dorothy's to happen without consequences. During these frequent visits to the care center, Emily discovered that Dorothy had become a natural leader among the residents. The text she wrote circulated discreetly, being read by women who recognized themselves in Dorothy's words. Mrs. Jenkins began to write as well, telling about the son who had promised to visit her for 6 months. Lucy emerged from her mutism and spent hours talking with Dorothy about the daughter who institutionalized her temporarily and never returned. "You know what's most painful, Emily?" Dorothy said one afternoon they spent together. "It's not the lack of comfort, it's not the bad food, it's not the rigid rules. It's the feeling that our entire life was useless, that all the sacrifices we made for our children meant nothing." Emily documented these conversations, recorded testimonies from other residents, photographed daily life at the care center. What began as an academic project was transforming into a journalistic investigation about a reality that society preferred to ignore. It was during one of these afternoons at the care center that the incident occurred that would change everything. Dorothy was in the courtyard with Emily, showing a new text she had written, when one of the staff approached with a cell phone in hand. "Mrs. Dorothy, there's a call for you." It was Karen, and her voice on the phone was different, tense, almost aggressive. "Mom, I heard that Emily has been going there frequently. We talked about this. She can't get involved with these issues." "Karen," Dorothy replied, finding a firmness in her voice that she hadn't felt in months. "Emily is my granddaughter. She has the right to visit me whenever she wants." "Mom, Emily is using you for a college project. She's exploiting your situation to get a grade. Don't you see that?" Dorothy looked at Emily, who was at her side listening to the conversation. She saw in her granddaughter's eyes a genuine indignation, a love that had no ulterior motives. "Karen, Emily isn't exploiting me. She's listening to me. That's different." "Mom, I don't want this situation anymore. I'm going to talk to the care center coordination to limit Emily's visits." "You can't do that," Dorothy said, feeling an old courage reborn in her chest. "Yes, I can. I'm your legal guardian, and if you continue with this attitude, I'll have to take more drastic measures." Karen hung up the phone, leaving Dorothy with hands trembling from anger and Emily with eyes full of tears. "Grandma, don't worry. She can't stop me from seeing you." But Karen could and did. The following week, Emily was informed by the care center coordination that she could no longer visit Dorothy without express written authorization from her daughter. Karen had claimed that the visits were disturbing the adaptation process of her mother. Emily didn't passively accept this. She sought legal help through the university's Legal Assistance Center. She discovered that technically, Karen was right. As legal guardian, she could control the visits. But she also discovered that Dorothy had rights that were being violated. It was during this time that Emily's project gained public dimension. Professor Barbara suggested that she present her work at a seminar on human rights that would take place at the university. Emily initially hesitated, concerned about the exposure this would bring to Dorothy. "Grandma, can I use your texts in a public presentation to show people what you're experiencing?" Dorothy reflected for a long moment. "Emily, if this can help other people not to go through what I'm going through, if it can prevent other families from making decisions like the one Karen made, then yes. Use my texts." Emily's presentation at the seminar was impactful. She read excerpts from Dorothy's accounts, showed photographs of the care center, presented data on elder abandonment in America. When she finished, there was a profound silence in the auditorium. Several people were crying. A journalist who was in the audience approached Emily after the presentation. "Can I do a story about this? Your grandmother's story needs to be known." Emily agreed, but she knew this would mean facing Karen's fury, and she was right. When the report was published in a local newspaper, Karen was furious. She called Emily, shouting about unnecessary exposure, breach of family privacy, public embarrassment. "Emily, you had no right to expose our family this way." "Mom, I exposed an injustice. Grandma didn't deserve what you did to her." "You know nothing, Emily. You don't know what it's like to take care of someone every day, to have your life limited by someone else's needs." "But Mom, you weren't taking care of Grandma every day. She lived alone, managed on her own. You only showed up when you needed her for something." Karen was silent for a moment. Then, with a coldness that frightened Emily, she said, "I'm going to sue your grandmother for defamation. and I'm going to legally request her interdiction, proving that she's mentally unstable and being manipulated by you." Emily felt the world collapse. Karen was willing to completely destroy Dorothy to maintain her version of events, but the news report had touched other people besides Karen. Emily began receiving messages from relatives of other elderly people in similar situations, from social workers who worked with elder abandonment, from lawyers specializing in senior rights. One of these messages came from attorney Richard, a retired lawyer who had read the report and became interested in the case. "Emily, I can represent your grandmother free of charge. There are legal aspects of this situation that need to be questioned." When attorney Richard visited Dorothy at the care center, he was impressed with her lucidity and articulation. He asked to see all the texts she had written, examined the documents of the house transfer, investigated the process that led to the institutionalization. "Mrs. Dorothy, you were the victim of a questionable legal maneuver. Your daughter took advantage of the trust you placed in her to gain control of your assets, and then used that control to force you out of your home. But, sir, she's my daughter. I gave the house to her because I believed it was for the best. Mrs. Dorothy, generosity shouldn't be punished. You made a gesture of trust, and it was used against you. This is not acceptable." During the investigations for the legal defense, attorney Richard made a discovery that would completely change the course of the situation. He found, among the documents that Dorothy kept, an old will she had made years before the house transfer. "Mrs. Dorothy, do you remember this document?" Dorothy examined the paper with emotional eyes. "Yes, I remember. I made it when Karen was going through financial difficulties. I wanted to ensure she would get everything if something happened to me." "Mrs. Dorothy, even after everything she did, you were still leaving everything to her?" Dorothy nodded sadly. "Sir, I've always believed that a mother's love should be unconditional, even when it hurts." The will was definitive proof that Dorothy was not an unbalanced or vindictive person. She was a mother who, even being abandoned by her daughter, still cared about her well-being. It was the ultimate demonstration of a love that didn't demand reciprocity. When the case reached the court, the room was full. Dorothy's story had touched many people who came to support her. Emily was in the front row, holding her grandmother's hand. Karen arrived accompanied by her lawyers, trying to maintain a dignified posture. But when Dorothy was called to testify and read one of her texts aloud, describing the feeling of being treated like disposable furniture, Karen began to cry. "I never wanted to hurt you," Karen said, interrupting the testimony. I never knew how to show love. After my father left, I learned that people we love can abandon us. So I protected myself, kept my distance, didn't allow myself to feel too much." Dorothy looked at her daughter with a mixture of pain and understanding. "Karen, honey, but I would never abandon you. I was always there, always available." "I know, Mom, but your availability frightened me. It made me feel guilty for not being able to reciprocate with the same intensity, and that guilt transformed into resentment." For the first time in decades, mother and daughter were speaking the truth to each other. Karen admitted that she never learned to deal with Dorothy's unconditional love, that she interpreted her dedication as silent demand. The judge, moved by the scene, ruled for the maintenance of Dorothy's autonomy and established that she would be entitled to a symbolic compensation for emotional abandonment. But more important than the legal decision was the conversation that Dorothy and Karen had after the hearing. "Mom, I want to try. I want to learn to truly be your daughter." Dorothy hugged Karen, crying. "Honey, I always knew you loved me. I just didn't know how to show it." Emily watched the hug between the two with a full heart. It wasn't a complete reconciliation ending. It wasn't the reparation of all damage, but it was a beginning. It was the recognition that love can be imperfect, can be frightening, can be misunderstood, but it's still worth fighting for. Dorothy left the care center a week later. She didn't return to the old house, which had already been sold, but moved into a small apartment that Karen rented for her, close to her daughter's home. It wasn't the same as before, but it was recovered dignity. The book with Dorothy's texts was published 6 months later, with the title I Still Exist. It became an unexpected success, touching thousands of people who recognized themselves in the story of love, abandonment, and reunion. On the last page of the book, Dorothy wrote, "I learned that true love doesn't need to be perfect, doesn't need to be easy, doesn't need to be always understood. It only needs to be true. During all these years, I loved my daughter even when she couldn't reciprocate. Today she is learning to love me back, and that, by itself, is worth all the suffering we went through. Emily, now graduated in journalism, dedicates herself to reporting on elderly rights. Karen is in therapy to learn to deal with her own emotional wounds, and Dorothy writes every day, no longer about pain and abandonment, but about hope, new beginnings, and the infinite capacity of the human heart to heal its own wounds. The end. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Dorothy, Karen, and Emily has deeply touched your hearts. This narrative about love, abandonment, and family reconciliation reminds us that it's never too late to repair the bonds that time and hurt have frayed. To continue this emotional journey with us, we've prepared a special playlist with equally touching and transformative stories, which you can find by clicking here. If this story awakened emotions in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on this video. Every day we bring unique narratives that explore the complexity of human relationships and the power of true love. Don't miss our next content and tell us in the comments how this story touched your lives. We'll be waiting for you for more emotions and reflections.